such a pleasure to be here in Chile. And I want to begin with a question. Okay, why are we here? Not in some cosmic sense, why are we here in the universe, but rather, why are we all here right now together in this place? Well, as we've learned during the pandemic, it's better to be together than to be alone apart. And if you want to have a take-home message from this talk, it's that our capacity and our need to be together, to connect with each other, is our superpower as a species that enables us to overcome the biggest challenges. I'm going to talk about one of those challenges right now, which is that we live on a hot planet that's getting hotter by the year, hotter by the day. And even if we stopped burning fossil fuels tomorrow, that heat is baked in. It's trapped in the atmosphere. So the consequences we're going to be living with for decades, if not longer. And one of those consequences, of course, is an increase in the frequency and the intensity and the ferocity of storms like hurricanes, tropical storms, etc. Those storms can have devastating impacts, as we have seen year in, year out. This is a photograph from Hurricane Ida, which hit the coast of Louisiana in 2021. Absolute devastation. That area has not recovered. But remarkably, this is Philadelphia. A result of that storm, it landed 1,000 miles away from us. We don't need to have all the sound done. And that is my running path along the Schuylkill River, under 10 feet of water. Okay, 1,000 miles away from us. So you can't hide. There's no running, right? There's nowhere you can escape the consequences of this climate disaster. And it's not just tropical storms, as we've seen heartbreakingly, the scenes from Los Angeles over the last week or so with intense wildfires. I know that's a problem here as well. These disasters themselves are difficult, but they also cause other challenges, like mass migration of people away from areas where they find it difficult or even impossible to live due to changes in climate, to heat itself, to aridification, to the storms themselves. And of course, the mass migration of people, largely from the global south to the global north, is having immense political repercussions, right, which is even affecting elections in the US and elsewhere throughout Europe. Now, what I'm here to talk to you about today is what is the impact of these climate change-induced disasters on our minds and on our brains, right? And those impacts can be direct in the form of the impact of heat itself. So heat is bad for your brain. If you look at emergency room visits for psychological conditions, they increase linearly with temperature outside. Those are direct impacts, and also there are indirect impacts. The trauma, the anxiety, right, and potentially lingering depression that result from loss, that result from just the terror of running away from floods and fires, et cetera. And there's a little bit of data out there, neuroscience data, to kind of give us an inkling into what might be happening. So for example, a study done of folks who endured the Camp Fire in California in 2018, at follow-up, those individuals who had directly experienced the fire showed a kind of hyperactivation in the prefrontal cortex where that was indicative of kind of challenges with emotional regulation. This is the same kind of activity you'd see in people with anxiety disorders and sometimes depression. That's a very macroscopic view of the brain and what might be happening as we encounter and deal with these kinds of challenges. And as a neuroscientist, I want to go much deeper, okay? I want to understand what's happening at the level of the cells, the neurons in our brains, the fundamental computing units that assemble into circuits that actually enable us, right, to make decisions and to guide our behavior. This is very difficult to do in humans, routinely, practically, and ethically. And so for that reason, I turned to an animal, the rhesus macaque here, beautiful animal. And the reason why I study these animals, about 50% of my time and my career has been spent working with them, is that they share so much of their biology and their behavior with us. Okay, so about 93% of their DNA is shared with humans. Their brains are basically wired up in exactly the same way ours are, and all of those brain areas do the same things our brains do. and they share a lot of their behavior with us. And one of the most important features of their behavior for comparison with humans is that they depend on each other. So monkeys who have more, just like people, monkeys who have more friends, more social connections, deeper social connections, live longer, healthier lives, and they make more babies, which is the equivalent of humans of making more money, okay? So these are rhesus macaques, and I have had the great good fortune for the last 17 years of studying a population of thousands of monkeys on an island off the coast of Puerto Rico called Cayo Santiago. This population of rhesus macaques was founded in the late 1930s as a sort of natural laboratory, and that's what it is. It's a beautiful natural laboratory that allows us to study real behavior under real social and environmental conditions, but where we also can get access to biological data, which would otherwise be very difficult. So we have people on the ground who follow the monkeys around and record every single thing that they do. We know who's friends with who's enemies. We know their social ranks. But then once a year, we also perform a big monkey rodeo. We round up monkeys, and we take all kinds of biological samples that then we can relate to their behavior. Okay, so that's the setup. And we had been merrily doing our work there for about 10 years when suddenly this happened. So this is Hurricane Maria, Category 4 hurricane, 2017, struck the island of Puerto Rico. Okay, packing 165-mile-an-hour winds. It was incredibly destructive. At least 3,000 people living in Puerto Rico died, and there was subsequent to that just a torrent of mental health issues. So anxiety, depression went up, suicides went up dramatically, and of course there's been a brain drain from that island as people have moved away from it. And the conditions have not really improved very much since then. They still have many troubles. So before Hurricane Maria, whoops, can we turn down the volume? Before Hurricane Maria hit the mainland of Puerto Rico, it hit our monkey island, Cayo Santiago. This is a helicopter view. We hired a helicopter to first go visit all of the people who work for us in Puerto Rico to make sure they were alive and healthy. And then we had a look at the island. You can see it looks like a bomb went off. It's completely destroyed. The habitat is completely devastated, ravaged. All of the physical infrastructure for doing our work, right, had fallen apart. It was really just a complete disaster, and it really hasn't recovered either. Okay, so this is a natural experiment that we could not replicate in the laboratory in any way. And it put us in a really, I think, enviable, although difficult position of capitalizing on this natural disaster to see what happens almost in real time to the bodies, the brains, and the behavior of these animals. Ultimately, how do they respond? So what we found is, yeah, in fact, this kind of trauma is bad for their health. So what I'm plotting here is the flexibility of the monkey's hips. So think if any of you are runners, like your knees. If you're my age, your knees are not working very well. It's kind of arthritis from inflammation. Same thing for those monkeys. So the blue curve is flexibility is a function of age, going out to the right. And yeah, basically, it kind of declines as you get older. But now look at the red curve is a group of monkeys sampled after the hurricane, 1 year after the hurricane, and you can see the devastation it has had on their flexibility. So these monkeys, young monkeys, look like elderly monkeys. The green curve is the second year after the hurricane, and it's even worse. So their bodies are taking an immense toll from the impact of the storm and the devastation in the environment. And we think that a lot of that is due to inflammation, okay? So we have taken blood from these monkeys, and we sequenced their DNA, and we looked at the expression of genes in the blood. And what we found is that genes that get turned on when we get older, that are involved in inflammation, get turned on when you experience a natural disaster, and genes that get turned off when you get older, that are involved in repairing your DNA, repairing your body, those get turned off after you experience a natural disaster. And in fact, I know those curves are a little bit difficult to show, but we created a molecular clock based on that genetic data. And what we find is that the monkeys age biologically by 2 years just by going through that hurricane. So that's the equivalent of 8 years of human life. I don't know if any of you want to experience that. I don't. So it's bad for you, bad for your body. But one thing you can also notice is that there's a lot of spread in those curves. So some monkeys aged a lot more, and some monkeys were much more resilient. And that's what we're really, really interested in. Where does that resilience come from? And we had the great fortune of examining the brains of monkeys who have actually experienced a hurricane or who have not experienced a hurricane. Okay, when we compare them, we found something remarkable. These are a few of the areas that get bigger, physically larger, in monkeys who have gone through this natural disaster and its aftermath. And it's not the whole brain, okay, and it's not nowhere. It's very specific areas. And what struck us is that some of these areas are core components of what we call the social brain network. And a couple of the areas are highlighted there in monkey brains. This is the network in our brains that manages our moment-to-moment interactions with each other, as well as our long-term relationships. Monkeys who have more friends, the physical size of these brain areas is bigger. That's also true in humans. So humans share the exact same social brain network, wired up in exactly the same way. People who have more friends, parts of this social brain network are bigger. Okay, so that gives us a clue. Something about social behavior is turned on and the brain is changing, right? It's plastic when these monkeys experience this acute devastation and then lingering trauma in the environment. And when we looked at their behavior, it told us why their brains changed. This is a complicated graph. Basically, what you've got on the left in green and to the left of the red line is the monkey's social networks, their friendliness, and their aggressiveness before the hurricane. So what you find is that the monkeys are pretty aggressive, not so friendly. After the hurricane, we see a massive increase in friendliness, a massive decrease in aggression, and the monkeys spend all their time reaching out and working on their relationships. They make new friends, and then they maintain those friendships. Okay, wow, that's really powerful. We see that in human beings often, following disasters or terrorist attacks. But, like after 9/11 in New York, everybody got nice, but it only lasted for 2 months. Then New Yorkers went back to being their old selves. We've had the amazing opportunity by continuously tracking these animals for the last 7 years to show that those monkeys who worked the hardest at making friends, who developed the most friendships, the greatest social support, were the most likely to survive over that 7-year period. So monkeys who had, that's the blue curve, monkeys who had the most friends were 6 times as likely to survive that intervening 7-year period than those monkeys who had the least number of friends. And that raises a couple of big questions. What makes some monkeys really good at making friends and keeping friends? And what keeps some other monkeys from being able to do that? And what are the benefits that these friendships confer? And they appear in 2 guises. One is that having friends gives you access to resources. So having a friend gives you a ride to the airport, right? Or a ride to the hospital when you need it. For the monkeys, the most precious resource is shade. There's very little shade there now. The temperature's 8 degrees hotter. It's at the limits of what they can tolerate. So monkeys are out in the open, making friends all morning, so they have someone to sit next to in the shade late in the afternoon when it's super hot. The other thing that friendship, that social support delivers is a sort of direct reduction in the kind of alarm bells that go off in our brains when we are confronted with a threat. So this is work from the laboratory, from recording from neurons in the brain when monkeys are threatened in the presence of a partner, their best friend, or when they're alone. When they're alone, you see the bells, these alarm bells go off in the brain, and when they are with their partner, you see that that's suppressed. Okay? Those alarm bells would eventually lead to a cascade of cortisol and ultimately really bad things happening in terms of inflammation. And there's some data out there already showing that in the context of natural disasters, people who have more friends, who have more social support, are more likely to fare better. This is from the Japanese earthquake in Japan and tsunami from about a little more than a decade ago, showing that those folks who had more friends had a significant reduction in likelihood of experiencing depression after the tsunami. Now, the big challenge here, I'm painting this picture that our solution, right, our way forward in this increasingly catastrophic environment is through our togetherness. And yet, at the same time, we are living in an epidemic of loneliness, of isolation. This is particularly true in the US, but it's really worldwide. So how do we manage to balance that? Okay, and I'm going to do something here. I'm going to skip ahead because this is going to get changed. One way to do it, would be to directly activate that social brain network. And our colleague Daria Knock in Bern, Switzerland, has shown that if you electrically stimulate the social brain network, as shown here, people are more likely to make pro-social choices that benefit future generations rather than being selfish. Now, that's great, but I think you would all agree that this is probably an impractical and not scalable way to solve this problem. So for me, let's say I'm going to throw out a really kind of crazy idea, but I think it has some merit. There are people out there, not neuroscientists, who have figured out how to hack our social brain networks. Okay? And who are they? They're the marketing people. The marketing people at iconic companies like Apple and Coca-Cola and Nike, right? They create a sense of community, so much so that it becomes your identity, and you'll be willing to carve the logo, the brand logo, in your hair, right, or get a tattoo. Okay? Amazing stuff. And we found in the laboratory that this connection to the brand, connection to the company is very real and very social. It depends on the social brain network. So what I'm showing you here on the left and on the right, the brains of people who are Apple iPhone users on the left and Samsung Galaxy users on the right, and we asked them, we just basically presented them with information, something good, something neutral, something bad, happened to Apple or happened to Samsung. What you see in the brains of iPhone users is evidence of empathy for joy, empathy for pain, just like you would have for a member of your family. Samsung customers, you don't see anything, okay? It's a tool for them. There's nothing beyond that. It does not provide that sense of community, connection, and social reward. And so I'm going to back up here now. My charge is to you, those of you out there who are great at marketing. This is an opportunity. We need you. We need you to help us activate this social brain network in all of us, right? Because the better angels of our nature are there. They're just lying dormant, okay? Activate that, and hopefully we can create a sense of bond, of community with the Earth itself and with our fellow passengers on this planet so that we can solve these big challenges. So with that, thank you very much for your attention, and look forward to seeing you all in the hallways.